Putin has no veto and has no vote on whoever would join NATO in the future. Only if he wants to join NATO, but I don't think he wants. So, and he has nothing to say about this. We have to be very clear.
Thank you, Mark. I think we have the connection to America established, but I'd like to go to Ambassador Richard Grenell, who is President Trump's newly appointed presidential envoy for special missions. I think he is speaking to us from the State Department. I think that was Senator Ernst, who we will get to in a second, but I think we are trying to get Ambassador. There you are. Ambassador Grenell, can you hear me, and can you say something so we can make sure you can hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm in Los Angeles, not in Washington, but thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure and an honor. So, Ambassador, give us a sense. Everyone is wondering. There has been much speculation. How does the Trump administration view the situation that currently between Ukraine and Russia? Give us, in the broadest strategic terms, how does the Trump administration view this situation?
Well, first of all, I don't think that there's a big surprise. President Trump has been very clear about wanting to solve these problems. I think there's a big frustration from Americans that we've had a lot of talk over the last several years about just more military spending and more war. Let me give you an example. Vladimir Putin and Joe Biden have not spoken in more than 3.5 years. Now, we think that's outrageous. The American people think that's outrageous. You should be able to talk to people. Talking is a tactic, and you're not going to be able to solve problems peacefully unless you actually have conversations. And so I think there's a huge frustration from Americans that we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars and our leaders aren't speaking to each other to try to solve problems. The State Department, the U.S. State Department, a place that I love very dearly and have worked there for 12 years, has been shoved off to the side. There hasn't been talks. Matter of fact, we watched as Joe Biden spent months telling the world that the Americans had intelligence, evidence, proof that there was a war about to be started. And we find it pretty shocking that there's so many foreign ministers in Europe, so many American politicians at the time who just didn't try to stop a war. If we had evidence that a war was stopping, we needed to have diplomats rush in and try to stop this war. So I think strategically, what Americans are watching is, once again, just this rush to war without having tough diplomats come forward and say, hey, let's talk. Let's try to avoid war. We think that it's immoral to not try to stop wars that are being told to us are absolutely inevitable. And let me just add one thing is I think you're going to run into a big buzzsaw in America if we have the NATO Secretary General talking about adding Ukraine to NATO. The American people are the ones that are paying for the defense. You cannot ask the American people to expand the umbrella of NATO when the current members aren't paying their fair share. And that includes the Dutch, who need to step up. And so when we have leaders who are going to talk about more war, we need to make sure that those leaders are spending the right amount of money. We need to be able to avoid war, and that means a credible threat from NATO. NATO needs to be absolutely prepared, but we need to have diplomats that are avoiding that war. And so I think the American people are frustrated, is the real summary.
Let me ask you, Ambassador, we are in the war now, and the question is how to end it, as you say. In recent days, President Trump has said things that suggested he has maybe come to realize or has focused on the problem and sees the intransigence of President Putin as the principal obstacle. He tweeted out recently, as you know, I think Zelensky is willing to make a deal Putin is not, and he's ruining his country, he's destroying his country. If that's the case, if President Trump sees it that way, does it make sense to put more pressure on the Russians militarily and economically, and President Trump talked about more sanctions, in order to make him realize that he needs to come to the negotiating table?
Look, I think that's a fair and legitimate question, and I think my answer would just be, we have bad choices because after 3 years, we've watched this war drift even further into chaos. It's getting worse, not getting better. And so President Trump and the Trump administration arrives on the scene after watching, again, our leadership not even talking in the United States between Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin. And so now that President Trump is in office, I think he's been handed a terrible mess. There are not a lot of great choices, but President Trump is somebody who has a credible threat and has already made clear that he's going to pressure both sides to end this. He's focused on trying to stop the killing. And so I think all issues will be confronted with a variety of different options. So what you're talking about, Fareed, I think is a legitimate option. But I would say just give President Trump a little time. He's the best negotiator, and there's a difference between a threat and a credible threat. We've seen that from Joe Biden saying don't, and President Trump immediately jumping in and trying to communicate with both sides and pressure both sides to the table.
Ambassador, that was a very helpful overview. Really, thank you for taking the time to join us.
All the best. Thank you.
Let's now go to Washington, to Senator Ernst and to Mike Lawler. I think we have Senator Ernst first.
Thank you, Fareed. And it is very good to be with you, and to the distinguished panel, thank you as well for your discussion today. And I will start by saying, with the inauguration of President Trump, we now see an end to the Biden administration's failed leadership. Everywhere that I have traveled through Europe and into other countries, whether it's at security conferences, whether it is on various congressional delegations, what I have heard from the leaders all around this globe is, where is America's leadership? And that era of questioning where our leadership is now over. We do have a president, as Ambassador Grinnell had stated, that is willing to engage and have those tough conversations, those conversations that President Joe Biden wouldn't. So what we have seen is President Trump, in communicating with President Putin, saying, end this ridiculous war. If it doesn't end, there will be consequences. And you've talked about the economic impacts to Russia's economy. President Trump is willing to engage, whether it's taxes, tariffs, or additional sanctions, and hold Russia accountable. He does want to see an end to the loss of life. He wants to see an end to the continuous contribution of dollars into a war where we see our friends in Ukraine being killed. So look, I am willing to engage in that, and very excited about the prospect of winding down the war with extreme pressure on President Putin. Now, another key to this is ending what we see as this new axis of evil. Russia is now partnering with North Korea, bringing North Korean soldiers to the fight. They are using weapons manufactured from Iran, and they are using China with their space capabilities. So we also have to put pressure on that new axis of evil. And then finally, as well, and Ambassador Grinnell stated this, we need everyone to engage. I believe in America first, but not America alone. So we truly do need our partners to step up and engage as well. And Rick spelled it out. We need everyone contributing what they have promised within NATO. So we have a new era of leadership in the United States of America. Can we wind down this war? I do have faith that President Trump can provide the necessary leadership to do so, and we stand ready to assist. So thank you, Fareed, so much. And again, we look forward to supporting our friends in Ukraine and ending this war once and for all.
Senator Ernst, can I ask you a quick question, which is, you mentioned tariffs, sanctions, extreme pressure on Putin. Would Congress be willing to appropriate more military aid to Ukraine in the event that President Putin does not come to the negotiating table?
Yes, I do think that that is up for discussion, and we have been willing to provide that military aid in the past. And if we are working hand in hand with President Trump to end the war, I think we can come to that agreement. I don't want to get out over my skis on this, but we want to see a victory for Ukraine. We want to see Putin put back into a box. But I do think that leadership is key on this, and President Trump will lead those discussions. And I do know that Congress is ready and willing to assist how we can to bring an end to the war.
Senators, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Now let's go to Congressman Lawler.
Thank you, everyone, for allowing me to join you tonight. I want to thank my colleague, Senator Ernst, for her leadership on so many issues impacting our allies around the globe. But we are in the most precarious place since the lead up to World War II. I think, obviously, as Senator Ernst outlined, the unholy alliance between Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea has created a tinderbox around the globe. And unfortunately, under Joe Biden's leadership, not only has America been weakened, but I think our allies have as well. And it has created real challenges as President Trump assumes office. And I think the president is right to seek to engage Russia, to seek to engage China on these issues. But there needs to be, obviously, concrete steps taken. And, you know, I look at, for instance, the illicit oil trade between China and Iran that has resulted in a $200 billion increase in Iranian petroleum sales. That is what has funded Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and other terror networks in the Middle East. You look at, obviously, in many instances, Europe purchasing Russian gas. That has helped fund their efforts in Ukraine. So we have to look at this holistically. It is not just about having a strong NATO, which I know Senator Ernst fully support. We obviously have to look at this from the standpoint of the decisions that are being made and how that is impacting these global conflicts. I have been very clear. I support Ukraine. I have supported sending military assistance, financial assistance to Ukraine. Many of you probably don't know, but my wife is from Moldova. Her family lives on the Ukraine border, so I'm acutely aware of the consequences of failure here. I have no doubt that if Ukraine were to fall, other former Soviet satellite states would be in jeopardy. And that would be catastrophic for Europe. That would be catastrophic for America. So we have a responsibility as the United States to lead. I think President Trump is prepared to do that. And then though some may not like his style or the words he uses at times, the reality is our adversaries understand one thing. They understand strength and they understand bluntness. Unfortunately, Joe Biden had neither. And I think that helped contribute to the situation that we find ourselves in today. A war that is dragged on for almost 3 years, resulted in massive casualties. and seemingly has no end in sight. One of the challenges that we found as members of Congress in dealing with the prior administration was they really had no plan for how to end this conflict, and no plan for how to ensure Ukraine's sovereignty. I believe President Trump is going to be very clear with Vladimir Putin about the need for this war to end. You saw it today with his statement that he put out, that he does want to see a resolution, but if Putin does not come to the table, there will be significant and severe consequences to the Russian economy. And I think Europe needs to be prepared to take significant action as well. And so that is where we find ourselves today. But this requires strong, united leadership between the United States and Europe if we are going to push back against this malign effort by China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea to undermine and destabilize the free world.
Thank you so much, Congressman. That was extremely helpful and much appreciated here. Thank you.
Thank you.
The focus people have had is on the question of what happens to get to a peace. But of course, we're quite far away from that right now. And I wondered if I could ask the President of Poland, how much do you worry that this war continues? And what does it mean for Poland when it confronts a war so close to its borders? It just feels to me like you are in a situation that is far more acutely threatened than almost any other country.
Distinguished guests of that meeting, distinguished participants, presidents, prime ministers, dear friends, you know, it does matter what will be the end of that war, and we can't say that every final and peaceful solution ending this war is in the right interest of Ukraine, Poland, and our part of Europe and our part of European Union. I'm thinking now about the Central European countries, especially those countries who had been for years behind Iron Curtain in Soviet zone of influences, and as you know very well, some advisors of Vladimir Putin, sometimes they mention that this is real zone of Russian influences also now, and this is the right of Russia to have its influences at that part of Europe, and also at that part of European Union. So this is the question: what should we do to achieve a peaceful solution, end of this war, which will guarantee Ukraine sovereignty, independence, which will guarantee the power of the international law? Yes, that international law is respected by Russia, by Russians again, because they are breaking international law every day. And what we should do to stop imperial ambitions of the Russian elites, which are absolutely visible now. If you look at Russian aggression against Ukraine, if you look at the language they have in Kremlin, in Russian elites. If you watch Russian TV, if you see the amount and the tongues of Russian propaganda, you see what's the real problem and what's the real solution for that situation should be. So if we talk and if we ask the question is how to encourage Vladimir Putin to sit at the table of the peace talks, my answer is we should launch such a strong measure to force Vladimir Putin to ask for peace negotiations, yeah, because this is not I don't want to beg Vladimir Putin to sit at the table. I want Vladimir Putin to beg us, to beg Ukraine, to beg allies of Ukraine to sit at the table and to talk how to end this war and how to solve all the problems we have also around. And I fully agree with the Secretary General, with Mark Rutte. This is not a local conflict. This is global conflict. So it requires global solution.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me just say you're coming to the end of your presidency, and I just want to say you'll always be welcome at the Ukrainian breakfast, even as a past president.
I hope I won't be hungry in the future.
Let me ask the President of Latvia, since we are now talking about real frontline states, how worried are you about the security situation, and how does a country like Latvia look at a Russia that seems to, as the President says, believe that its sphere of influence should be in a way the old Tsarist sphere, if not the old Soviet sphere?
Well, indeed, I think that each and every frontline country, as you say, Latvia included, is very worried about Russian ambition. We are hearing not only Russian officials, but also Russian propaganda talking about the kind of reinvention, restation of Russian Empire or Soviet Empire. The Baltic states included, Poland included. They are now talking also about Finland being at one point part of Russia. So from that point of view, of course, the outcome of the war in Ukraine is crucial. But having said that, I think that we do have two things that we need to do. Number one, yes, I do hope that American administration will be successful to end this war. But when the war ends, we also must make sure that Russia does not regroup, does not get back some economic power. So even if there is a kind of deal, sanctions, economic pressure should continue. And number two, I do believe that now this is the moment of truth also for Europe. Defense spending, defense industry, we are talking a lot. My own country is currently at 3.4% of defense spending. We are now discussing about raising to 4 to 5%. It is partly not only because of President Trump's statement, but also because we see that we have real needs. So from that point of view, indeed, I do hope that the strategy to stop the war, to keep Russia accountable would work, but also we should understand that I don't believe that Russia is going to stop. It will simply may use the time and then to restart either the war in Ukraine or to challenge its neighbors, and I think that the part of the strategy should be also to make sure that this is not happening.
Thank you. Let me ask the Prime Minister of Belgium, Alexander De Croo, about the new sanctions package the European Union is putting together. But, how strong is it? And more importantly, if there were a deal, is there some thought about a staged and staggered relaxation of the sanctions? Because after all, if Putin gets a total relaxation of the sanctions the minute he signs the deal, that provides him with every incentive to regroup and go back into Ukraine. So how do you think about that issue of a deal, sanctions relief over a longer period of time?
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Maybe let me first react on some of the statements we heard in the video calls. I think it's important to say, who's the enemy? The enemy is Vladimir Putin. The enemy is outside, it's not inside. And I see a lot of finger pointing between partners, and that's not helpful. I think we have to be extremely clear. Putin needs to be weakened, and Ukraine needs to be strengthened. So if we see where we stand today, I mean, 3 years of war, Russia has not achieved any of their strategic goals. None of them have been achieved. And the Russian economy has been weakened significantly. In this 16 package, I think gas and LNG needs to play a very, very important role. I think fertilizers we have to look into as well. We see that the export of fertilizers from Russia has actually increased compared to the war. But I think we're in for the long haul. The Russian economy is weakened, but our analysis is that the Russian economy can sustain the war at least for another year. And in everything we see, it is quite clear that Vladimir Putin would have the ambition to regroup and then have another go. Maybe not at Ukraine, but at another country. So we have to sustain those sanctions. And I'm convinced that we can go into a peace negotiation, but honestly, don't we first have to strengthen Ukraine before we get into a peace negotiation? And then talk about how do we sustain peace and how do we make sure that Russia is not a threat to us European countries and to the rest of the world. And that can only happen if you have sanctions that are robust and that are sustained in the future. So my analysis is that we are going for a long-term sanctions and that we should not inverse the discussions. Based on what I hear now, it looks like a peace negotiation is just around the corner. Really? I don't believe so. I think that first we have to strengthen Ukraine, and then we'll see afterwards.
Thank you. Thank you. So the question becomes how united, I mean, everyone is worried about America, I understand, with the new administration. But how united is Europe? Is there a danger that there will be divisions within Europe? And how should one think about solving that problem? I asked the Prime Minister of Croatia. Andrej, what are your thoughts on that?
Thank you very much, Farid. Thank you, Victor and Klaus, for the invitation. I think that we have seen over the past several years not only brutal aggression against Ukraine, and here I specifically greet the Ukrainian servicemen and women who are here and thank them for their heroic efforts of defending their country. But also we have seen the increased influence of Russia in democratic processes across Europe. And as the time passes, as the elections unfold, what we can see is that there is a trend of having political forces coming into ruling or governing positions, if not alone, then in coalitions, who are, in my view, called the pro-peace leaders. Everybody is pro-peace, but there is a difference and a nuance. Are we pro-peace, which will then sanction the aggressor and remain the today illegally occupied and illegally annexed territories endlessly under Russian control? Or are we going to stick to the main principles of international order as we have known it over the last 80 years, and that is the respect of one's sovereignty, its territorial integrity, and respect for its neighbors' existence? Because what I have noticed recently from Russia is something completely different what we are talking here. Russia spends 40% of its budget on defense and security forces. 9% of its GDP is spent on defense. They have literally possibilities of enrolling endlessly conscripts, whether domestic, scattered across 2 continents, or added by North Koreans fighting war in Ukraine. Internally, I don't see any opposition force who can endanger Putin. Methodological element, which was mentioned by Mr. Grenell, are we talking to Putin? Putin has been isolated now for 10 or 11 years. There are literally few leaders today in power in the West who have some sort of real personal contact with him. Very few, not more than 5, I would say. And that matters. That means that there is no trust, there is no track record of sort of trustful relationship, and limited influence. Plus, the way I see their narrative, I think they're back now into the first year of aggression. I said last year here, first year it was the negation of Ukrainians' very existence. You are not Ukrainians, you are small Russians. Second year, confrontation with NATO. And third year, the New World Order, something which is very different from what we are representing here today. Now I see a tendency in their rhetorics that they are back to the first year rhetorics. And that is very dangerous. And I think we should all, with all due respect to the new impulse of the new President Trump administration, wish to start talks and engage, we should not fall into a trap of political naivete. Putin can be patient, Russians can endure the sanctions regime. I don't see really any dramatic thing internally that 15, 16 or 26 packages of sanctions have changed anything in their line of thinking. And that has happened also in the past. So my view is fully agreeing, strengthen Ukraine as much as we can, stick to our principles, and not allow that whenever and whatever peace deal comes, that it's not just any deal that will petrify the current occupied territories into some sort of a frozen conflict and give them a chance for another opportunity.
So let me give you let me just press on that one issue, which is, imagine that the Trump administration is eager to get to a negotiation. And imagine that there are certain countries in Europe, let's name them, Hungary, that sees the issue more closely the way the Trump administration does. What does Europe do in a situation like that?
First of all, I think Europe should be at the table. Ukraine should be the main actor at the table. And if we find some sort of a ceasefire, it should entail a gradual, peaceful reintegration of the occupied territories. That would be, in experience that my country had 30 years ago, the only solution. Nobody wants more victims, more death, more refugees, more destruction. And I think that the Ukrainians know it, everybody else knows it, but the plan should be really all the way through. Not the first step, and then we deal with other crises in the world and forget about the state of play in the field.
Let me ask the first Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, who also is the Minister of the Economy, how important is the security guarantee aspect of this potential settlement to Ukraine's revival? Because after all, when I think about it, you know, business and investment is not going to go into a country where people are worried that 2 years from now Russia might invade again. So describe to us, Yuliya, how do you think about this issue?
Thank you. First of all, I'm very delighted to see our friends, Ukrainian and foreign business, and I'm grateful that we have very open, frank, and candid dialogue, and I think that trust is the base. And what we see here in Davos, that businesses are ready to invest and to boost their activity in Ukraine, but they're expecting for very concrete security guarantee. And it should be the part of the potential future settlement, and it should be very practical. Tell you honestly and obviously that NATO is the best solution, not because of the legal document, but because of the military infrastructure that should be set in place. We have very good example. At the beginning of large-scale invasion, our seaports were blocked. And you remember that there was a deal with Turkey, UN, and Russia sabotaged this deal, and we were able to open this Black Sea corridor when the missile system were in place. And it's and then we opened the corridor and export have risen, and even like the number of the last year, that export rise by 15.2%. And if we speak about Ukrainian economy, so it's vital for us, business to come in. We are doing, in economic sense, better than Russia economy does. So we fall up to 30% during the first year of large-scale invasion, but 2023, 5% growth. Last year, 3.6% growth. And, this year we also expect, but we need investment to come. And using this opportunity, I want to appeal to business as well and to say, look, you have not less power than politicians have. And if to take into account very pro-business Trump administration, I would ask you to appeal to your government and to talk with them like you talk with us, and describe very precisely what kind of guarantee you need to step in Ukrainian market. So that's why I think that it's your time also to be actively participate in this negotiation. But in general, business are very optimistic, and they expect that the active phase of war will be ended this year. Let's first negotiate on security guarantee, that with very, as I say, practical implementation, and with sanctions that should be imposed in place and should be strengthened, and then discussed peace agreement.
Let me ask you, Yuliya, one of the things that Trump administration officials, and I think people are close to the president, have often talked about is the worries about corruption in Ukraine. What are you going to say to them that can show concretely that Ukraine is taking active steps, that it is not, that the money will not all go down into a kind of cesspool of corruption?
I think that during the last 4 or 5 years, we are improving a lot. And if you see the its index of perception of corruption, so we raised extremely fast in this list. And just if you look at the reforms that we are providing during the wartime, that we're providing around 200 reforms. So it's requirements from EU, it's requirements from IMF, World Bank and others. So it means that we are simultaneously keep fighting, keep working, and keep reforming. And that's why I think that it's a good result. Of course, there are always places to improve, but I think that we're in good shape right now.
I'm going to ask President Stubb of Finland to close out this round. But before that, I did want to give Mark Rutte a chance to respond to Ambassador Grenell, because he did directly address some of the comments you made.
Yes, well, he is right, of course, that the problem is not the US. The problem is Europe. The problem is that, and Trump has consistently made this point, that in Europe we are underspending in terms of defense. And he made that point, I think it was in 1980 the first time, but he became president first time in 2016, 2017. He was very clear on this. And I think, thanks partly also to him, and maybe to a large extent, we have seen this upturn in spending in NATO on the European side. And he felt that basically the US was getting a bad deal, and that Europe was basically funding its social model and its healthcare system, etc., and its pension system, by underfunding in defense. The problem, of course, is that we are not yet all at 2%. That's problem number one. Problem number two is that 2% is not nearly enough. To your point, it is not nearly enough. We are safe now. But NATO collectively is not able to defend itself in 4 or 5 years if we stick to the 2%. Now, Jens Stoltenberg started this whole process within NATO, which will end somewhere in May, June this year, by which we will decide what it is exactly we need in terms of, and excuse me for the jargon, the capabilities and the measurements and the gaps we have. But this is necessary stuff to be done to exactly establish what we need. But I can guarantee you, when you look at the incoming data now, 2% is not nearly enough. It will be much more. really much more, and that will have a huge impact. But we have to do this. And secondly, we have to ramp up industry production, because at the moment we are not doing it. But this is also a problem in the US. China is producing 6 times faster industrial output now than the US. And the whole of NATO, from California up to and including Ankara, is in terms of ammunition producing in a full year what Russia is producing in 3 months. And as I said yesterday, Russia is not bigger as an economy, the size of the economy, than Belgium and the Netherlands combined. So we are really in crisis mode here. So first, money, much more to be spent, fast. The ones not on 2% have to get to the 2% in the next couple of months. We cannot wait any longer. And then we have collectively to move up, and we will decide on the exact number later this year, but it will be considerably more than that too. And then on industry production, we are really in a bad place here. And don't think that China is producing crap like they did 20 years ago. The ships they are now building, and they have now a bigger navy than the US has, are much better, are at least quality-wise at the same level. And this is a problem we have within NATO, that the better is always in NATO the enemy of good. That we want to have perfection, and we not always need perfection. That is what Ukraine is learning us and teaching us in this war. They don't have the luxury of going for the 10 on a 1 to 10 scale. They have the luxury to get to a 6 or a 7 and then apply at a fast speed the latest developments and innovation. So, and this is another problem. We don't innovate enough. We do not buy collectively enough. We are not getting into big contracts with industry. So all these things we are working on, we can solve them. This is the good news. So don't end this breakfast from my side on a somber note. I'm still very much optimistic. We can handle this, the spending, the industry production, etc. And in Ukraine, we need the US also to stay involved and to do as much as possible to get Ukraine in a position of strength whenever peace talks start. But I can tell the Europeans, if this new Trump administration is willing to keep on supplying Ukraine with defense industrial, from its defense industrial base, the bill will be paid by the Europeans. I'm absolutely convinced of this. We have to be willing to do that. Because at this moment they are paying more than the Europeans. And here Trump is right. It is a worldwide conflict, yes, but still Ukraine is closer to Europe than to the US.
Alexander Stubb, give us a sense of how you think this plays out in the next year.
Sure, but before I make my 3 points, just to Victor, I actually think the slogan of this breakfast is the correct one. So for me, the thinking is, yes, Finland first, but Finland first means a Ukrainian victory. Why? Because it's tied to 2 key elements of who we are. One is our interest. We have a 1,340-kilometer long border with Russia and a similar experience in the winter war and war of continuation that you're having right now. And secondly, it's our value base. So in that sense, it's a no-brainer for us. Finland first is victory for Ukraine. That's why we are the biggest, 5th biggest supporter of Ukraine and will continue to be so in the future. I think quite often Americans, Europeans and Ukrainians are accused of not having a strategy of victory. I kind of disagree with that. I actually think we have a clear plan. We just talk a little bit to the side of each other at times. For me, the victory plan is linear and goes in 3 phases. The first one is short term. In the short term, we need to continue the financial support, the military support, and the political support that we've given to Ukraine in the past 3 years. And I actually don't see that coming down. Remember the conversation before the US elections that the US would pull away from Ukraine and throw it under the bus. From what I hear from Trump and from what I hear on video today, I just don't see that happening. I'm actually quite encouraged by the commitment that still exists. The second timeline, linear, is midterm. And here, 24 hours has turned into somewhere between 3 to 6 months. And we have to think ahead of what we do in these 3 to 6 months. I think the starting point was mentioned here. Ukraine needs to start whatever negotiations begin from a position of strength. And we need to keep on pushing the idea that no negotiations without Ukraine. And I have a sense and a feeling that the rainmaker in this, President Trump, sees that as well as General Kellogg. I think the early signs that we're getting from the Trump administration are actually quite positive. Having said all of that, remember that with statehood, there are three key principles which in my mind are holy. One is independence. Will Ukraine retain its independence? My answer is yes. Two is sovereignty. Will Ukraine retain its right to choose whether it wants to join the EU and or NATO? My answer to that is yes. And the third one is territorial integrity. And again, I come to the rules and principles of international law. We need to stick to the borders that have existed previously and stick to that setup. These three principles, in my mind, are holy. And I say this from experience. Remember, in World War II, Finland retained independence, lost sovereignty to decide in which club we wanted to be, and we lost 10% of our territory, including the areas where my grandparents and my father were born. So let's not let that happen in Ukraine. Long term, and my third and final point, there are a lot of business people here. Reconstruction is a low-hanging fruit. It has to happen, it's a possibility, it's an opportunity. This is not a Marshall Plan where we stash out money. This is a business opportunity for a country that has been partially destroyed to be built up, so use that. Long term, there are two key issues for me. Both are sine qua non. Ukraine needs to become a member of the European Union, and in the long run, Ukraine needs to become a member of NATO. That is the only way in which Putin has lost this war, and lost this war big time. Remember what he started with. Thought he could make Ukraine Russian. It became European. Thought he could dismantle NATO. It has enlarged. And thought he could break up the transatlantic partnership. It didn't happen. So what we must do at this stage is to make a choice, to be honest, between Yalta and Helsinki. Yalta was a carve-up of big states and spheres of interest. Helsinki Accords in 1975 was about international law and principles. So I think it's very important that when we sit here next year, there will be a ceasefire, there will be a peace, Putin will have lost the war, Ukraine will have won the war, and Ukraine will have retained its independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. Slava Ukraini.
Let me get a few comments from the audience. Jens Stoltenberg, you were Secretary General of NATO during the first Trump administration. So give us some pointers on how to deal with Donald Trump.
I think the main thing is to actually engage with him. So when there are concerns or issues raised about what the new administration will do, I think the best thing is to go over to Washington to sit down and discuss. And the reality was that back in 2017, some allies thought that we should just stay, to freeze the relationship with the United States, do almost nothing, and hope that things would improve after the next elections. We did the opposite. We actually sat down with President Trump and addressed the issues he had, especially on defense spending. And as Mark just alluded to, the reality is that things have really changed. When we made the decision to start to spend 2% of GDP on defense, only 3 allies met that guideline. Now it's 23 allies. So that's a big difference, and it makes it much easier to tell whoever is president in the United States that European allies are taking this seriously. On Ukraine, I remember very well that there was, the position among NATO allies back in 2016 and 2014, also after the annexation of Crimea, was that we should not provide lethal aid to Ukraine because it could provoke Russia. and therefore we didn't provide so much lethal aid. It was President Trump that decided to start to provide lethal aid, including the javelins. So the first javelins were delivered from the United States under the previous Trump administration. So I'm not saying this is easy. I cannot promise you anything on behalf of the new US administration, but I'm saying that engaged on the issues and based on experience, also Trump can be quite strong on Ukraine.
Thank you, Jens. Since Radek Sikorski is right there, I wonder, Radek, if you could tell us, when you look at the situation, are you optimistic or pessimistic about whether or not we are moving in the right direction, and why?
I'm confident Ukraine can sustain the fight for this year. And Russia's economy is going south. So there may be a deal to be made. But the real point I want to make is the following. President Trump has started well by recognizing that it is Putin who has to shift his position, not Ukraine. Poland, by the way, is leading by example at 4.7% of GDP on defense. But if I can make one suggestion to the new administration, coming from the depths of experience of a country that warned the rest of the West about Putin and wasn't always listened to, it is this. This is not the Putin that President Trump knew in his first term. I would be skeptical about granting Putin an early summit. The President of the United States is the leader of the free world. Vladimir Putin is an outcast and an indicted war criminal for stealing Ukrainian children. I would suggest that Putin has to earn the summit, that if he gets it early, it elevates him beyond his significance and gives him the wrong idea about the trajectory of this. Thank you.
Let me also quickly get a thought from David Rubenstein, because we were talking about business, David, and investment. How do you think about the issue of how does Ukraine rebuild itself, which is going to be a monumental challenge?
Yeah, the business community in the United States, and I think Europe, is interested in investing in Ukraine and helping with the rehabilitation of it. But I think nothing is really going to happen until you really see some kind of settlement, because I think business people are not going to put money until there's some kind of settlement. 2 points I wanted to make, though, Fareed, is that the conventional wisdom in Washington is that there will be some type of agreement, a settlement, truce this year. Generally, I think it's fair to say that when there is a conventional wisdom in Washington, it's almost always wrong. And so don't be so certain what people in Washington think is going to happen is going to happen. And I'd like to remind people that there was a conventional wisdom in Washington after the D-Day invasion that the Allies had won the war and it was basically over, and it was just a mopping up action. But then the Battle of the Bulge occurred. More than 200,000 casualties occurred, more on the American and Allied side than on the German side. 200,000 people were injured or killed during that Battle of the Bulge after the conventional wisdom said the war was almost over. So I am worried a bit that if people let down their guard and think there's going to be a settlement soon, that the result could be another effort by Russia to do what happened with the Battle of the Bulge, which is to put one last effort in, put all their troops in, and it could result in an enormous amount of casualties. So please, everybody, don't think that the conventional wisdom in Washington is right, and don't let down your guard, because there could be another Battle of the Bulge that could occur with great tragic results. Thank you.
A crucial question that has arisen here is what exactly is the state of the Russian economy? Can it sustain the war? Are the sanctions working? And I think Zanny Minton-Beddoes is the editor-in-chief of The Economist. She began her career working in Poland, as I remember, for Jeff Sachs, reforming the economy, which seems to have worked out rather well. So, Zanny, give us your sense of Russia and the Russian economy.
Thank you, Fareed. It's, as everyone has said, it's an honor to be here again at this breakfast. And every time I'm here, I am my sense of hope is reinforced, and I think this year is no different to that. So what I've heard in the last few minutes has really made me think that, David, you're probably right, conventional wisdom is wrong, this isn't going to be quick, but that there is a determination from Washington that not everybody expected. To your question, Fareed, briefly, I think the Russian economy has held up better than we expected. I think we have to be honest about that. I think that in the last 3 years, the sanctions have been less effective than people expected. I think we've learned that sanctions have a half-life. The capitalist spirit is extraordinary. People find ways around sanctions, and unless they are extremely tough, people find ways around them quickly, and we need to acknowledge that. But nonetheless, the Russian economy is now under some pressure. Inflation is above 20%. The ruble is falling. This cannot go on forever, because this is an absolute wartime economy. Yes, Putin is throwing absolutely everything at this, but at the same time, he is saying it is not a war. Remember, you go to prison in Russia if you say that this is a war. So he can't continue that for too long. I don't think you can have the kind of war economy he's created and pretend that there isn't actually a war going on. So over time, I think the Russian economy is going to be hit. But if we look at history, Russian economic weakness in the end results in dramatic change within Russia, but it takes time. So don't expect this to happen very quickly. The economy is weaker than you think, but it is a slow rot of a weakness. That would be my assessment. Thank you.
I wanted to check if we have the Foreign Minister of Portugal here. I thought I saw him, but I think he's left. So I think we'll skip that. I wanted to now go to some of the most important people we have in this room, who don't have as grand titles perhaps as everybody else, but they have a simple title that is perhaps more important and more evocative than any other. They are Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian heroes. And I wondered if we could hear from some of the soldiers who are fighting the war that we have been talking about. Dmitro Finashin, are you here? And can we hear from you?
Good morning. I'm very glad that you're here. I'm very glad to see everyone and very glad to hear all those words of support that you are joining in support of Ukraine. But I would like to ask you for two things. The first is, don't be shy and don't be proud. Don't be too proud to ask Ukraine to share our experience. No one can deny that we have the experience of waging a modern type war. We can tell you how you can hone your arms, how you should precise your weapons, how you should build fortifications. No doctrine is working anymore. Don't think that while we are going and asking for help, well, we are not very proud. We are fighting for our survival. We have to do this. We constantly say, we even sometimes beg, help us, but this does not make us weaker or less valuable. So let's share experience, exchange experience, and develop. Another thing that I wanted to ask for is to think not to care too much about the pensions of your population now. Please think about raising your military and defense capacities and potential. Unite. If you are not strong today, you will have to think about how you will pay pensions to such young boys like I am. This is not a very pleasant prospect, so please become stronger, and this will be better for us as well, because you are our partners, and Russians will understand that they are in a critical situation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dmytro. Kristina Boychuk, can we hear from you?
Thank you. It's very important for me and soldiers from front line to be there and understand that the world continue to support us. I have only explained 3 important words for me. It's words death, war, and life. Death. We are here today because the best of us fallen for our shared right to a free life. Memory is the least we can preserve. Let us honor with a moment of silence all those who have perished as a result of Russia's armed aggression. Thank you. Second words, it's war. During the battles for the town Rubizhne in east of Ukraine, I realized for the first time what changes I need to undergo, not only to survive, but most importantly to protect my units. I mastered an entirely new and previously unfamiliar technical tool provided by our partners. Together with me, this tool also transformed. The world has changed. To survive in the world, you must change. And second words, it's life. While carrying out a mission near the settlements of Makiyivka, since 6 months ago, my comrade, seasoned warrior, was died. He had mastered a civilian IT specialization, but when Russia invaded Ukraine, he returned from Mexico and joined our unit. 3 months after his death, his daughter was born. The life of this little girl is the most precious things we have. All of us. It is our responsibility. We are obligated to protect it. Life will triumph our death. Light our darkness. Slava Ukraini!
Glory to Ukraine.
And can we hear from Daniel Salem?
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to thank everyone here and everyone who's helping and everyone who's fighting with each and every word that has been spoken here. I just wanted to tell you a story, a simple story. I want you to imagine a close-range fight that we've been in summer of 22, Posad Pokrovsk. We've been 8 of us. After 4 hours of fighting, the fire was seized for maybe an hour. And we're stuck in the trench. And as you can see, I'm always hungry. And I really wanted to eat. And from out of nowhere, Posad Pokrovsk is a little village. It's not little, it's actually vast. It was a beautiful village. It had a lot of houses, cows. And from out of nowhere comes a little boy. He was wearing a Real Madrid shirt. He was with no shoes, dirty feet, and happy big eyes. It maybe sounds right now like a story from a movie, but it happened. He ran out to us, and he didn't say anything except like, "You want to eat?" And we looked at each other. I looked at my fellow man. I looked at him and said, yeah. He ran and went to his house. It was maybe 100 meters from us. He went back with bread. He said, I didn't ask you if you want to drink something. I said, what do you have? He said, fresh milk. I said, yeah. He went back. He got us milk. It was the best breakfast I ever had in my life. His eyes were so happy that he thought, he looked at us as the heroes. He looked at something really grateful. He saw the uniform, he saw the guns, he saw how fearlessly we were fighting, and the fight was near his house. His family was in the house. And after we said goodbye, he went, okay, I gotta go. I gotta help my mom. He went back to the house. And I think it took 5 minutes. Tanks arrived. And the only thing I remember is that the house was destroyed with the families of his family inside. And I'm certain the boy died. And I thought to myself, do we do enough? Do we all do enough? Did we fail as his heroes? I just want you to understand, and I think we do all understand, that these paid firearmed people from Russia, tomorrow they'll get their vacations. And maybe they'll get their families and go to your countries. These people who were killing our children are sitting in cafes in Spain, France, Poland, Finland. The killers and murderers are closer to you as you think. They're not somewhere. They're in your countries. We're letting them in. We're opening the doors for them. That's it. Slava Ukraini.
You know, at this point, I think it is 87 countries around the world that have condemned Russia's aggression. And people often say, well, where is the global south? Well, you know, as you can tell by that number, a large number of countries in the global south have actually condemned the Russian aggression. And one of those countries is represented here today, the Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I thought I would ask the Vice Prime Minister Masudi to say a few words to close this out for us.
Unfortunately, I will speak in English. I have someone to translate it. I will speak in French, please. Je vais parler en français. Je voudrais d'abord honorer la mémoire de tous les Ukrainiens qui sont tombés au combat.
I first would like here to honor the life of all the Ukrainian people who fight for this war.
Parce qu'il faut toujours se battre pour quelque chose, mais pour l'intégrité de son pays, on ne peut pas hésiter à se battre pour ça.
Because we all have subject to fight for, but for the sovereignty of her own country, it's a good reason and the strongest reason to fight.
Je voudrais aussi saluer la mémoire de tous les héros qui sont vivants, qui continuent à se battre pour l'intégrité de leur pays, les militaires ukrainiens, la population ukrainienne.
And I really have a good thought here for all the heroes that are fighting nowadays, for Ukrainian soldiers, for civil Ukrainian people too.
Au nom du gouvernement de la République démocratique du Congo et aussi de son président de la République qui a été ici à Davos, je voudrais dire au peuple ukrainien, à tous les 87 pays qui les soutiennent, que la RDC vit la même situation.
On the name of my government of Democratic Republic of Congo and of the name of our president that was here until yesterday, I really would like to bring my support to the 87 countries that are really supporting Ukraine and remaining that our country is having the same difficulties.
Il y a aujourd'hui presque 10 millions de morts en Ukraine. Il y a 10 000 morts plutôt en Ukraine. Il y a plus de 6 millions de morts en République démocratique du Congo.
Today there are more than 10,000 people who died in Ukraine, and on the same time in DRC there are more than 6 million people that are dead.
Les femmes enceintes, les personnes vivant avec handicap, les personnes de troisième âge, les enfants, c'est un peuple qui est en train de déambuler dans tous les pays. Aujourd'hui, même au moment où je vous parle, les bombes sont en train d'être larguées en République démocratique du Congo.
Pregnant women, handicapped persons, children, all of them are really having a hard time now with the war that is handling now in our country. And the moment that we are speaking, bombs are being released in the rest of the country.
La population congolaise souffre tout simplement parce qu'elle regorge de beaucoup de ressources naturelles, minières et forestières.
Congolese people are really suffering for this war for one reason, because they are really having a lot of natural resources on their soil.
Nous sommes dans une situation actuelle de réchauffement de la planète où la République démocratique du Congo se présente comme pays solution face à la crise climatique.
Nowadays, with the climate change and all the difficulty that we have on this area, DRC is really positioning itself as a country of solutions.
Et ça ne vient pas de moi, ça vient de l'Union européenne qui aujourd'hui a un projet ambitieux en République démocratique du Congo avec la Tour Afrique qui a prouvé que le bassin du Congo constitue aujourd'hui le premier poumon du monde face au réchauffement de la planète.
And this is coming from the European Union that has a really strong project in DRC that is really showing that DRC is really the lung of the planet for
le bassin du Congo dans son ensemble, c'est le premier poumon du monde.
Congo Basin is the first lung on the planet.
Et la RDC a plus de 62% des forêts tropicales humides qui sauvent aujourd'hui l'humanité en absorbant toutes les pollutions du monde, 24 000 gigatonnes par an.
And DRC has now 62% of tropical forests that are today absorbing all the pollution of the world, more than 24,000 gigatons per year.
Aujourd'hui, tout le monde a le téléphone. Il y a le satellite, il y a les nouvelles technologies de l'information et des communications. On parle de la transition énergétique. C'est la République démocratique du Congo qui regorge plus de 60% des produits, des matières critiques qui aident l'humanité à aller vers la transition énergétique et les nouvelles technologies de l'information et des communications.
Today we are all holding and having phones. We are working with technological information, satellites. All these elements have huge materials that are coming from DRC. 60% of everything that you have on your phone comes from our countries.
La différence entre nous et l'Ukraine actuellement est que un tel breakfast donne de la force à la population ukrainienne de savoir que nous sommes soutenus quoi qu'il y a des problèmes.
The difference between Ukraine and us is that with holding such breakfasts and such events, Ukraine had the strength to see and to know that they have people with them.
Malheureusement pour la République démocratique du Congo, quoique nous sommes en train de sauver le monde du point de vue de l'humanité, d'être le poumon mondial, et du point de vue des nouvelles technologies de l'information et des communications, nous ne sentons pas l'appui du monde. Qu'est-ce qui se passe?
we're going to have to close.
Unfortunately, on DRC side, despite that we are the solution in terms of climate change, and despite the fact that we have all these natural resources, we doesn't feel really this help for the world. What is happening?
Autant la Russie est condamnée, autant nous demandons que le Rwanda soit condamné, parce que les 87 pays qui soutiennent l'Ukraine sont capables de terminer la guerre dans le bassin du Congo, de terminer la guerre dans le Grand Lac en République démocratique du Congo.
As Russia is now being called as not a good country, following all these things, we are really now requesting that in the same time, Rwanda is being held responsible for everything that is happening.
With that request that you make and very eloquently made, I am going to have to close because we do have to maintain the time and we do have to close the meeting. Madam Vice President, thank you so much. I just want to close with one thought, which is we've heard a lot today about the determination of the democracies of the world to support Ukraine. And I think it's important to remember how important that is, because democracy's enemies always assume that they can outlast the democracies. And that is their key strength, has always been the idea that the democracies will flag and falter and fail over time, but they can stay strong. The truth is, history doesn't bear that out. Hitler believed he was building a 1,000-year Reich, and it lasted not even 15 years. The Soviet Union always believed that it was going to outlast the West, but it turned out that the West outlasted the Soviet Union. The Taliban and Al-Qaeda used to say that Islamic fundamentalism would win because, in the phrase they used, you have the watches, but we have the time. But look at all those three movements and look at the West. We bicker a lot, we disagree amongst each other, we have open disagreements, but at the end of the day, there is an extraordinary staying power in the democracies of the West. And I would just want us all to remember that strength and to remember that as long as we keep our eyes focused on the North Star, which is to continue to support Ukraine, we will outlast this next form of evil as we have so many before. Thank you all so much, and as always, thank you, Victor.